What's the most important data points agents should be tracking?
First is your own numbers. The second is market data. And the third is around brokerage data.
For the agents watching this who feel behind or kind of unsure where their numbers are, what's the first step they can take today to help them get clear?
I would try to look for a company, probably a technology company, that is really good at doing that heavy lifting of moving from data to insight to action. So you can be in the driver's seat, not playing around with pivot tables, but rather just immediately enhancing conversations that you're having with people.
Hey there. Thank you for tuning in today. This is going to be an amazing conversation with Sean, the founder of Corded. We did a really awesome Inman News article a few months ago, 35 questions your next broker doesn't want you to ask. And today we're going to talk about understanding your numbers and really getting an understanding of it. I think as a real estate agent, it's so important to have a good understanding of your numbers, not just where you rank. Who cares? Great job. But where are the numbers really coming from and how can they help you locally with an offer, with a new listing, and really getting to know the numbers? So Sean is probably the one person I really respect in knowing this stuff because he knows numbers and data and agents. So Sean, thank you so much for taking the time today. Excited for this conversation.
Thank you, Troy. You need to grow your friend group if I'm the only one you can think of. But I'm happy
Yeah,
to help today.
there we go. So Sean and I were talking and where this whole premise comes up, and what the idea is, really real estate agents they don't know their numbers. They historically, they say, oh, I closed 3 transactions, but 3 transaction is really what? 5 transactions is what? You might be a top producing agent, but what is that? So want to dive into that. So Sean, let's talk big picture. Why is it important right now for agents to know their numbers? Like, especially in a market that's transitioning from a seller to a normal to a buyer's market. Like, what do you think is the key stuff?
Yeah, I think at the highest level, I think it's not just about your numbers, but it's about what's happening in the market and then also what's happening among the other agents in your market and the company you work for and other companies you might want to work for, right? And so, we'll get into all of the details, but I think having a strong command of the key market and individual performance metrics can help you win listings, so conversations with prospective buyers and sellers, um, get listings closed faster, run great buyers presentations, strategically position yourself versus the competition, which can also lead into where you prospect and other places that you might focus relative to others. And then it can even support a move to another brokerage or even just ongoing conversations that you have at the company that you work at. So it's really quite a lot of different avenues, and I'm sure we'll get into each of those specifically. But I would argue just at the beginning that agents in general are not paying attention to or not using data enough to support each of these different items. And it's not because of, kind of a lack of capability. I think it's because there's so much data in different places. And there aren't that many kind of readily available insights. And I think what's interesting now, what some technology companies can do, what AI can help you to do, is go from data to insight to action. And if we're relying on, just kind of the MLS to provide us with all of the insights, all of the different action steps across any one of those items, that's where we see folks kind of not really taking full advantage today. But I think now that the technology is available, now that there's data relative readily available via MLSs and those can speak to one another. Now technology companies and new technology can really help to take you from data to insight to action.
So we talk data, we talk knowing your numbers, which knowing your numbers is, super important. We're not just talking units and volume, right? I think a lot of agents, they'll say, oh, I know my units are this. They don't know what their volume is. Or they'll be like, I closed $50 million, but realistically it was 7 transactions. What's the most important data points agents should be tracking?
I think I'd kind of break it down into three categories. First is your own numbers. The second is market data. And the third is around brokerage data. So when we think of your own numbers, all of the classic metrics that you think of, like sales volume, units, average sales price, close to list price ratio, days on market, price per square foot. I think how they've developed over time for you is really interesting as you plan for your own business. But then also how they compare to other agents and the market broadly. There's some really interesting things, and I can show you this in a little bit, of how, for example, your own close to list price ratio compares to your days on market for specific transactions. That can really help you, for example, to understand how efficiently are you marketing homes, and what does your pricing, the effect of your pricing strategy yield. So I think there's a number of ways that we can kind of look at those. I think from a market data perspective, again, often these are well understood, but things like months of inventory, absorption rate, close to list price ratio in the market, median price per square foot, highest price per square foot in that area. If you're kind of thinking about planning with a buyer about what might this ultimately sell for in a competitive situation, those are the types of things that we tend to look at from a market data perspective. And each of those are a variety of different time periods to identify either common moments in time in the past that are similar to today, or even just trends kind of more recently. And then from a brokerage data perspective, things like, and you can think about this at your own company, but also maybe even at a company that is recruiting you or that you're considering working at, overall volume, units, average sales price per agent, how that's trending relative to the market, how that's kind of developed for that company over time. Often you'll want to compare that company versus your company if you're looking externally. Count and quality of agents recently recruited. But on the flip side, the count and quality of the agents who they've recently lost. Which companies this brokerage or your brokerage is having success recruiting against, and which companies are the agents at your company or a third company thinking about leaving to. So where is there kind of a better value proposition that's kind of attracting agents away? And then general things like market share across region, property type, price point. So that sounds like a really long list. And again, I think this is where maybe technology can help you kind of get to those insights quickly. But broadly speaking, I think about your own numbers, market data, and the brokerage data.
Well, and even with market data, I think it's important to realize that when they're talking about what's going on in the marketplace nationally or locally, in submarkets, or if you're very hyper local, there's a big difference in how that comes up. And being able to look at the data right there, it's hard to do it within the MLSs, without pulling it into an Excel sheet and into a pivot table to really see what's going on in your zip code or particular area. But that really helps track. Like if your neighborhood is in a seller's market still, where the county might be buyer's market, you're able to, with that data, to provide a different narrative and different marketing approach than others could, because this neighborhood's in demand.
Certainly. I mean, you bring up a really good point, right? Which is, rarely is it sufficient to kind of look at a whole MLS. There are so many different nuances between sub neighborhoods, different property types, price points. It's really helpful to kind of go into that. You were telling me, Troy, in an earlier conversation about how you yourself used to download data from the MLS, run pivot tables. And I think once we start doing that as agents, I think that that's a lot of work to try to get to something where it's kind of readily available in a lot of different places. And so, I'm kind of interested to talk to you also about just kind of how to use these things, because it's one thing to say, like, track all these numbers, but I think it might be helpful for some of the listeners to also think about, okay, so if I have this, so what do I do with that? Like, what does this allow me to do that I'm not doing today? I'm excited to kind of get into that.
Well, and so what I think, agents, when they know their numbers, not just like what their production was, but where their production stands up with, as a brokerage. For example, we were talking about, you thinking about switching brokerages, knowing where people are going or who's coming in. Where do you stack up in relation to the top producers that are there? If you're a top producing agent, if you're, your normal production level agent, where do you fit in this? Can you utilize this in aspects of, like, I'm thinking about going to brokerage A, but people are leaving brokerage A and they're going to brokerage B. Like, maybe I should look at this one also. They haven't reached out to
Hmm.
me, but maybe I should reach out to them. But even then, in the negotiation with your commission structure, your cap structure, some brokerages are fixed and you've got nothing you can do there to change it. But if you're going to a brokerage where there is flexibility with the commission structure and saying, here's historically where I've been, here's where I rank in the area where we are, and here's where I'll rank within your brokerage, you're able to go and negotiate a little bit better, which I think
Yeah,
is really important. And then
negotiate
you look at,
for split, negotiate for split, but also uh, with confidence, go to your broker and say, here's what I demand because I'm uniquely good at this thing that I know about, or I'm outperforming the average agents. I'd like some more support in doing X, Y, and Z. It's not only about the commission split and structure. It can be broadly about support and feeling valued as you start to understand kind of what you're best at and how that kind of stacks up versus others.
so great points. And then I think the third piece is that with agents, when they are going on either a listing presentation, to know where you stack up, not that you want to talk bad about a competitive agent, but being able to show really where you rank in an environment, what your list to sales price ratio is running versus the local trend or the local baseline, I think is a really good marketing approach, as a listing agent. But then you come into it as a buyer's agent. Where's the importance in knowing your data there? And this is where, like, a pivot table came in for me, not just knowing where I was in, where the office was ranking or where an agent was ranking, but like, if we were writing an offer on an agent's listing representing the buyer, how did they statistically price and where did they end up? Which, it's hard to go and really get an understanding of an agent's, like, negotiation strategy without knowing their numbers and where they end up. So if an agent's typically going 105% list to sales price, or they're 97, 95% list to sales price, gives you a completely different offer approach on where you're going to write the price or how you're going to do stuff. And even if their, average is 35 days on market versus 105 days on market, how are you going to strategize this with that? And I think that's where knowing the numbers, not just your numbers, really kind of come into play.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, so let's take both of those, kind of the buyer's example, a buyer's agent example, and the listing agent example. So, as you said, right? So, uh, I think what most folks know is a home isn't sold by kind of a brokerage. A home is sold by a professional, and that professional may be operating under kind of specific objectives, right? And so, when you look at the listing agents as the buyer's agent, look at the listing agents recent selling behavior on similar homes. I think that's a nice place to start. If you start to see patterns, right, around, for example, a lower close to list price ratio at the preference for shorter days on market, right? You might kind of infer that maybe there's some negotiating power with that listing agent because they're working with sellers who are trying to get their deals done faster, right? And so that's kind of like one place to start. I think the other thing to remember is we're living in a world now, kind of context is that there are companies who, one large brokerage in particular, who has made public the fact that they are intending to drop or fully discount the buyer's agent commission rate to 0% if they work with the mortgage company, right? And so whether those types of businesses are in your market today or not, it's reasonable to expect that as a buyer's agent, will increasingly come up against people who are willing to work with the buyer for less commission. So in that world, knowing things like again, for that neighborhood specifically, I'd probably look at neighborhood and property type and price point together as like, that's how I define the segment. The relevant months of inventory, absorption rate, close to list price ratio, the different price per square foot trends, like the back of your hand, and showcase, for example, how your close to list price ratio as a buyer's agent, when you represent buyers, is often lower than the 100% what it was listed for. That can show your understanding of the market and why they should work with you, and why not every buyer's agent is the exact same with the same amount of service and the same amount of value. And two, to prove that value on the buyer side, referencing, for example, when you get below 100% on your close to list price ratio as a buyer's agent, is a great way to kind of prove your value statistically. And so I think that's kind of interesting, and I don't see enough folks having enough access to that information quickly so that they can bring it and refresh it every time they have a conversation with a would-be buyer. I think there's a parallel on the list side, if you want to go there next, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So list side's important. You've got to be able to show your numbers, your specific data, list price to sales price, days on market, national average rarely matters. But what
Mm-hmm.
matters is like, in your local market or even in your county. I think counties play a lot, but sometimes the counties are so big, like Los Angeles County, you could have three or four different, really market types, if not way more than that. And what's going on days on market or, average list of sales price. And, whether it's a seller's market or a buyer's market, like I mentioned earlier, like it's never across the board one thing. So yeah, as a listing agent, where do you bring in the data, there to kind of really help a seller understand the value proposition and what you bring to the table?
Yeah, for sure. So let's take the example of a listing presentation where you're up against a few agents who have sold more homes than you in that neighborhood, right? Which is always going to happen early in your career, and then as you start to specialize, maybe that you tend to be one of those other agents. But in a situation where you're up against folks who, like at the surface level, have more experience than you, that's typically what the listing agent is, the seller, would-be seller, is trying to kind of understand, is like, who is the most relevant experience for me, right?
Mhm.
But if you can look a little bit more critically at the data, right, you could, for example, in this example, you could see that, okay, maybe I've only sold 3 homes relative to the 5 that the other agents have sold. But my close to list price ratio, for example, on the sell side for similar homes is 5% higher than theirs. And maybe my days on market is shorter, and my sold price per square foot is higher. For an analytical seller, that's the ability for you to prove to them that you can generate more value for the home, right? Potentially even faster than the other agents. And so I think we get into these agents kind of get into these kind of difficult conversations about commissions, either internally with their broker asking if they can bring it down, or even with the customers, buyers and sellers themselves. But I think the difference that we're talking about is like 1 or 2%, 1.5%. That's the debate that you're having with your buyer or seller. If you can bring that close to list price ratio and days on market to the table, and you can show that you're generating on average 5% value relative to the list price for your other sellers for similar homes, the debate on 1 or 1.5% of commission is a total wash, when on a net basis you're grossing a lot more, or the net will be a lot higher for that seller in that case. And you don't need to speak negatively about anyone in particular, but if you happen to have some intel on who you're up against, which I would advise all listing agents or would-be listing agents to ask if you might have that information so that you can plan appropriately for the meeting. I think that is a great way to kind of statistically, again, prove your work.
Yeah, and I think in markets, you kind of know who you're going to go up against. There's always the one agent that's got market share. They're always going to be considered. And then you've got yourself. And I think even now with everything that's kind of going on in the industry, just to kind of talk about what it is right now, not all brokerages are putting stuff on the MLS or have access to it. So as an agent that's at a brokerage that is, working as a competitor to one of those other brokerages, you have that data to say that, our houses sell faster than this other approach.
Mm-hmm.
Again, not trying to talk down about anybody else, but you have the data to show, as long as the data is in your favor, that, what we do in our marketing approach works better than other marketing approaches out there by putting your home on the market and exposing it to everybody.
Hmm.
sell faster and sell for a higher dollar amount, or
Yeah.
we're not listing the property at a lower amount to bid up the price. We're selling it here and going this way.
Yeah, I think, listen, I think a lot of folks in this industry have been kind of trained on this approach of kind of give value, right? Provide value, ask for business or ask for support, and then receive, right? And so in this concept of, okay, so what do I bring, right? What do I bring to the listing presentation that can differentiate me from somebody else, right? Everyone's going to be bringing comps. Everyone's going to have CMAs. Everyone's going to have a view of how to market the home. But in that kind of concept of marketing, we're seeing a lot of savvy agents who are actually using data to engage in reverse prospecting. And so that's where you basically walk into a listing presentation with a list of all of the agents who have represented buyers in that neighborhood, right? And I think that's one way to say, okay, listen, I am connected to 150 of the agents who are most likely to be representing people who would want to come into this area, because those are the folks that specialize here. And I think that's a way that you can kind of show that you've kind of done this work, that you're very connected in the community, and that you'll be specifically inviting one-to-one with handwritten letters or whatever it is, inviting those agents and their customers, their would-be buyers to your open house, right? And you obviously wouldn't give them the list because then they may go do something with it. But this is, I've done work up front to kind of identify who is best connected in this market for the other side of the transaction. I think that's kind of just another way, another example of something that you can do when you have access to data that's readily available.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, you kind of know who represents the buyers, but to let them know or give them that special, like, reach out to come and say, hey, this house is getting listed. You want to come and take a look at it today? Because I know you probably have a buyer for it. That's a great opportunity there. We know who we have relationships with, and that's why we go to like Brokers Caravan and stuff. But I think knowing who represents the most buyers in a particular area where the listing is a great way to do it, especially if you're listing a property outside of your normal area, and you might not know the agents there.
Well, the same actually works in reverse, right? So let's say you're working with a buyer and they're dead set on living in a specific school district. They've kind of got this kind of sub neighborhood that they're really, really excited about. They go on Zillow and there's nothing that matches their needs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they talk to the buyer's agent and they're saying, hey, listen, I've gone through Zillow. I've got all the alerts set up. We know we want to live here. Like we have to live on one of these kind of like 5 blocks in this area. What are you going to do? Right? How can you help me? You could do the reverse, which is let me go look up all of the agents who represented the buyers in that area, because those
Mm-hmm.
are the current owners. And if you want to give them an offer to do a transaction that may or may not hit the market, like I can connect you with the potential homeowners in that very specific area that you're looking at. And so that's kind of another way to do it. And you can do that on both sides of the transaction. So I think I actually know lots of agents who do these types of things. But I feel in general, because this data is not readily available to folks, not enough people are engaging in these more creative tactics that I think this specific market environment kind of demands.
Great point. There's a lot of agents that are at brokerages that have courted. Like you could actually walk into your broker or your manager and say, hey, can you help me understand where my numbers are? And they could literally go in and print out their numbers for an agent, right? And show them what their profile looks like and what their data is and how it goes over, right? And use it to coach that agent up.
Yeah,
You could go that route, or you could, look at your numbers and court it on your own. But understanding your numbers, what does that often reveal to people?
yeah. So again, I think that there's there's kind of the superficial understanding of what's going on in your business, and then there's kind of a deeper level kind of way to think about it. And just a few days ago, we released kind of a deep research module called specializations and another one called comparisons. In specializations, if it's okay, I'll just share my screen so you can kind of see what's kind of going on here. pull up an agent in particular as an example. So in specializations, you can see, for example, a breakdown of where geographically your business is coming from cities. You can look at it from a zip code perspective or county perspective over different time periods, right? To kind of get a sense of where are you winning today and maybe where are you kind of underpenetrated relative to a growing market. You can look at the same breakdown, but looking at it from a price point perspective. So, are you starting to do more in the luxury segment kind of over time? Are you, in this case, for this agent, getting, still the bulk of your deal in that kind of 250 to $750,000 range? You can look, for example, at the different property types that you represent, but also outcomes, right? So, of the listings that you had over the last 12 months, how did they result, right? Did they end up closing? Or some of them still active? Were any canceled, withdrawn, or expired? That's helpful insight as to kind of how well you're serving those different sellers today, or at least over the last year. And then you can also see things like, okay, days on market. But the one I really like is this one at the bottom, which is the listing efficiency. So we can plot for specific deals, right? So this is a specific transaction that closed at 100% close to list price ratio with 4 days on market. And we
Wow.
compare that with a home that was twice the cost, right? Over $1 million home, which was at a 98% close to list price ratio and 14 days on market. And then this one over here, 320,000, 98% close to list price ratio, 79 days on market. So you could, as an agent, kind of retroactively dissect your transactions over different time periods, kind of understand, did I make the right call with respect to close to list price ratio, right? In this case, maybe the seller said, I don't care how long it's on the market. I want you to give me the most amount of value. And in this case, right, the home was on the market for quite a while and it did sell at 98%, but it wasn't above 100%, right? We didn't end up generating kind of a bidding war because we were willing to kind of start with a higher price. And so that's the type of relationship between metrics that I think can be quite helpful. And also benchmarking to the industry or to the local market averages, right, are kind of interesting as well. Like, how are we doing relative to similar homes? So I think specialization is quite interesting from that perspective because it allows you to kind of go much deeper than the superficial, here's how much I sold last year or the last 2 years, that you might kind of typically bring to meetings with clients. You might bring that to kind of a meeting if you're being recruited. I think the other component that's interesting is looking at comparisons, which is where you can basically get your baseball scorecard and you can compare that versus different cohorts, right? So you can compare it versus the MLS, other agents in your city, zip code, county, agents at your brokerage, or agents at a different brokerage that maybe you're thinking about, you know, moving to or being recruited by, or you compare directly to the other agent or agents that you are maybe up against from a listing presentation. And so there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can kind of look at some of these comparisons. And I think that's kind of interesting because it allows you to start to understand, okay, where are you relatively doing well, and potentially, like, what can you negotiate for if you're talking to either your current brokerage or maybe a brokerage that's trying to recruit you.
See, and there's no way that you would have this without, the evolution of data and the evolution of like technology, right? Because
Mhm.
I couldn't have pulled that in a pivot table before. I guess I could have. It would have taken forever and I probably would have gotten completely lost in doing it.
Mhm.
But that is, understanding your numbers and where you are comparison to everything else going on to the fullest extent. I mean, I haven't seen that before. I absolutely love it. And even if you were a broker owner or a coach, having that ability to sit down with your clients, your agents, and walk them through their stuff quarterly, annually, half year point, and say, hey, this is where you're on trend for. How can I be
Mhm.
more value? How can I be more support to you? It's invaluable data.
That's at least what our customers have said, right? Our customers were the ones who are demanding it. I think that's it. Going and building things in a pivot table as an agent is possible, but it's not the highest and best use of your time, right? Because that's not typically where folks excel. In the same way that it's not my highest and best use to go into a listing presentation because I have not been an agent and I'm not as good at it as agents are, right? So as a technology company, kind of we think our role is to focus on what we're best at, analyzing data, taking it from insight to action, and providing that to folks who can then actually do things with it. And I think one of the kind of additional use cases that we've kind of talked about a little bit is, okay, imagine I'm being recruited by a brokerage, or even better, instead of relying on a brokerage to recruit you, which implies a selection bias, right? The brokerage needs to have the capacity to recruit right now, has to be looking at the right data to go find you, has to kind of find you at a time and reach out to you in a way that is interesting to you to pay attention to. There's another way to say, let me proactively go and look at the companies that I think would best support me. And the types of things that they could look at, right, is when agents join this company, how much did their business grow in 6 months, which is really helpful in understanding that kind of period of disruption that can happen when you switch brokerages. 12 months and 24 months, which is a sign of their support, their technology, training. And I think when agents leave the brokerage that you're thinking about joining, which again, most folks do not have kind of a good way to see that because they're just kind of taken off the brokerage website and maybe they'll see one or two of them on Instagram or on social media. So why are agents leaving this brokerage and going to other brokerages, right? Is there something that I kind of didn't see in this flashy recruiting presentation that is kind of below
Mm-hmm.
the surface that I could kind of learn from other agents kind of leaving the company that I'm thinking about joining and going somewhere else? And by the way, you could go see all their names. You can reach out to them and just ask them that question, which is also quite interesting. And on the other side, where are the agents coming from to join this company? Because if they're all coming
Yeah.
from my company, that's a pretty good sign. If they're all coming from a company that has a very different business model than mine, that's not bad. It's just interesting to know, right? They may just be making a decision based on competitive economics. For example, if you're at a company that already has those economics, then you kind of need to try to understand, is the thing that I'm trying to underwrite at this next company true for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that will help you to get the kind of beyond this PR stories and beyond just these kind of social media posts that are promoted by the companies and into the actual relative value to the agents that these brokerages provide.
It's almost like you've created the Carfax for brokerages. The numbers
Well,
don't
yeah,
lie.
I mean, yeah, I think it's interesting that you say that, right? Because I think most agents understand how valuable they are to brokerages, right? Um, but at the same moment in time, I think that there's a gap between how many agents use their own data today to communicate well with their customers.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a gap between really rigorously assessing a brokerage that's trying to recruit you versus just kind of a nice conversation and a nice relationship built with the person who's engaging with the recruiting. I think
Mm-hmm.
those are kind of gaps that hopefully kind of newer technologies can benefit, can help agents with. And I think I will say, just a quick plug, if I may, this all exists because of the MLS structure and because MLSs kind of share data and agents share data with the MLSs, and then the MLSs share data kind of in the industry broadly. So I think this is all possible in the US and only the US to some extent. And so we're seeing this kind of level of innovation picking up as the technology develops fast, and the U.S. is kind of pulling away in terms of what's available to everybody here relative to other countries. And I think that's just kind of one note as we think about some potential industry changes. Is we're kind of uh, all operating kind of at the on the premise of everyone sharing data with each other. So it becomes harder and harder when that data is less easily shared.
All right. So for the agents watching this who feel behind or kind of unsure where their numbers are, what's the first step they can take today to help them get clear?
I think given the data is rarely presented in the MLS exactly in the way that you need to support customer conversations, assessing your brokerage, figuring out where to work next, recruiting and retaining agents on your team, sending a first-time referral to someone in a different market outside of your MLS. I would try to look for a company, probably a technology company, that is really good at doing that heavy lifting of moving from data to insight to action. So you can be in the driver's seat, not playing around with pivot tables, but rather just immediately enhancing conversations that you're having with people. So I'd first maybe look for that in terms of kind of a company or a vendor out there who can who speaks to you, right? Who does some of the things that you're looking to accomplish. And in terms of some of the things that we're doing, kind of more and more over time, at Corded, we've only had this platform in the market for about 2.5 years, and I'm very, very grateful for the amount of progress that we've made, and working with a whole host of incredible people around the industry over the last 2.5 years. But if you look at the journey that we're on, we're kind of in the second inning, recorded as a company, and so. There's a couple of things that we're doing over the next couple of weeks and months. One is we're incorporating AI into our market research capabilities. So this will help make market data even easier to consume and distribute. We're also building features that will proactively alert you as to when the kind of interesting, relevant things are happening in your market, in your office, on your team, and tell you about that in real time. So kind of more of a push to you so that you know what's going on. We're continuing to build out our integrations with a suite of other technology companies. We want the data from the MLSs to be powering all the technologies that you use every day. And so we are facilitating that. And finally, we're going even deeper with our communications tools, which we didn't talk about today, but we're incorporating even more kind of AI, more customization into the way that you can then use Corda to communicate with others. And so, yeah, we're really excited about the roadmap, but a ton of exciting stuff coming up.
Well, you guys have one of my favorite products out there, for the real estate industry, purely because I just see so much value that it brings. I big believer in, if you can help somebody understand something today that they can learn from or implement today that changes their life tomorrow or the way they do business, it's valuable. And I think Corded does that, not just on like, hey, come work with us, but like on the coachability of it for agents, and their team leaders or their office managers or coaches. Like, so much value that comes from that when you do it correctly. And the ability, like, we sent you that video with Stacy and myself, and she says that, through Cordage, she gets the notifications of the closings in the office, but like who had a notable sale for them. This was their first deal in 6 months, or this was their highest priced deal ever. Like, that's really great stuff for agents to know, and reasons for the managers, the brokers, the owners to reach out and just show a little love. Like, it's a
Mhm.
relationship industry. People want to feel the relationship. And as more people, I think, subscribe to Corded, they're going to get reached out to by other people for those exact same things. So staying on top of it, being in front of the trend, and, being with some of the best in class helps you be best in class. So
Yeah, I mean, thank you for saying that. I think that hopefully what we're trying to help folks to do is to get more on the front foot, right? And be more proactive. Conversations with sellers, the way that you interact with your brokerage, those types of things. And again, doing what we're good at, which is analyzing the data and kind of making sense of it versus uh, having each person have to comb through a whole bunch of things themselves. So there's a
mhm.
lot of data available, but it needs to be kind of curated in a way that allows it to be more easily used. And so there's a lot more that we can do there as an industry. And I think if we're making some small headway there, then hopefully that's a good thing for everyone.
Well, thank you for the time. This is probably going to run before Inman Connect San Diego at the end of July. And if you're watching this, you made it all the way through this. Stop by and talk to Sean. He is one of the smartest innovators in the space, and his product has, for the past 2.5 years, been available to brokerages and now really open to agents to be able to go. So check him out.
Thank you, Troy. Looking forward to hanging out in San Diego.
You too, sir.